Everyone thinks Sonic is about speed, but his speed isn't his power, freedom is. And Shadow isn't his opposite because he's darker. He's his opposite because he understands control. Today, I want to show you why Sonic and Shadow aren't just rivals, they are two fundamentally different cybernetic systems trying to regulate chaos. To understand the difference, we need to talk about how systems survive chaos. So we're going to start with Sonic, obviously. He is a cybernetic feedback loop of speed and freedom. Sonic's key attribute is his speed and his desire for freedom. So, in a cybernetic framework, Sonic represents a system that is constantly in motion, seeking to maintain balance and adapt quickly to environmental challenges. His interaction with the world around him, whether it's the environment, his friends, or even his enemies, this resembles an open loop system where feedback informs his constant adjustment of actions. Sonic's interactions can be likened to that of a cybernetic agent who thrives on the input, that is, the obstacles, the enemies, whatever, and the outputs, his rapid movements and decision makings, creating this self correcting system. So, speaking of adaptive systems, Sonic's constant engagement with obstacles and enemies creates a feedback loop where his response to changing conditions reflect the cybernetic system's ability to cybernetically control and adjust through those different adaptations. So that's his ability, is to make these quick decisions in this real time. And this demonstrates that cybernetic control and adjustment of an adaptive system. And then when we think about communication channels in the least broad sense, Sonic's interactions with his friends like Tails and Knuckles are also cybernetic in nature. Through mutual communication and feedback, they coordinate their actions and achieve common goals. Go Team Sonic. Shadow, on the other hand, who I'm going to spend probably a little bit more time unpacking because he's a little bit more fun. Shadow represents a more closed system dynamic where control and identity are at the forefront. His journey of self discovery and his oscillations between hero and anti hero can be viewed as a system balancing internal feedback against external stimuli. Shadow is the product of both genetic engineering and external manipulation, which brings cybernetic ideas of control systems and autonomy into play. Shadow's struggle with his identity and purpose mirrors the cybernetic principles of self regulation. He processes external information such as memories and Dr. Eggman's influence and uses it to modulate his behavior, showcasing a feedback loop of internal conflict and external control. And this goes into the ideas of cybernetic autonomy versus determinism. Shadow's internal struggle between his programmed purpose and his desire for autonomy reflects a cybernetic system's battle between external control and self governance. So, in this way, Shadow embodies what it is to be a system striving for a higher level of self awareness or autonomy. And you can think of this as like a governance system, for example, the United States and how we've moved forward. So now we have to talk about dynamic equilibrium and cybernetic interactions. So through a cybernetic lens, Sonic and Shadow represent two different models of feedback driven systems. Sonic is a free flowing adaptive system focused on speed and his interaction with his environment, while Shadow is a system balancing internal control, autonomy, and external influences. Together, their interactions mirror a cybernetic dance of opposing systems, one focused on constant feedback and adaptation, the other on control, autonomy, and self regulation. And this is the really important part. What is going on with Shadow? Shadow is the chaos control. That's his major ability. And it's his ability to manipulate space and time, allowing him to warp reality, stop time, teleport. From a cybernetic perspective, this makes Shadow a regulator of exerting a high level of control over his environment and the dynamics of the universe around him. So if we apply Ashby's theorem, Shadow's use of chaos control implies that he has an internalized model of the system. And just to kind of unpack this a little bit more on his chaos control ability and why we're using Ashby, we have to look at it through the lens of the good regulator theorem, which states that every good regulator of a system must be a model of the system. So, in other words, for a system or agent to regulate its environment effectively, it must internally model the dynamics of the system that it is trying to control. So, looking at this internal model of the system, for Shadow to use chaos control, he must understand the dynamics of time and space. So, again, harpening back to Ashby, This means that Shadow's consciousness serves as a regulator with an internal model of how space and time work. Chaos control is the manifestation of this internal model applied to reality, making Shadow's regulatory power an example of applying a system model to control outcomes effectively. This is where we get the perfect regulation. When Shadow uses chaos control, he demonstrates a near perfect regulation over external chaos. Again, space time manipulation. His internal model must match the complexity and the nuances of the environment, allowing him to influence it precisely without destabilizing the system. Now, effective regulation requires this level of complexity. And again, looking at this theorem, it implies that a regulator must be as complex as the system it regulates. Shadow's ability to manipulate reality suggests that he embodies the complexity necessary to regulate space and time itself, particularly, again, through his chaos control. Shadow can manipulate space and time because his abilities correspond to the complexity of the system. He matches the system's behavior and exerts influence to stabilize or control it. And this is where we get into the ideas of feedback and adaptation, and how we're going to be rolling this into what's going on with the role of the Chaos Emeralds. Cybernetics relies heavily on feedback loops where the regulator receives information from the system and adjusts accordingly. Chaos control, while seemingly instantaneous as we see him do, can be seen as Shadow adjusting the state of reality based on his internal understanding and feedback from the environment. And this is where he is the key of feedback and control. In chaotic environments, Shadow uses this chaos control to adapt to new information and stabilize or alter the reality to his advantage. This aligns with the cybernetic principles where effective regulators receive feedback and adjust their actions accordingly. Now, let's talk about the role of Chaos Emeralds when it comes to Shadow's regulation. Because Shadow's ability to perform chaos control depends on the Chaos Emeralds, we can analyze this situation as follows. Chaos Emeralds as cybernetic amplifiers. Those Chaos Emeralds, they act as amplifiers for Shadow's control over space and time. While Shadow possesses the internal model needed to regulate space and time, fully executing that control requires the Chaos Emeralds. This suggests that his internal model and feedback system rely on external energy inputs. So for an external resource in this regulation, again, going back to Ashby, the Chaos Emeralds can be viewed as as an essential external resource that complements Shadow's regulatory function. His internal model allows for a theoretical regulation of chaos, but the Chaos Emeralds provide the energy required to enact that regulation. Now, Emeralds and complexity matching. Shadow's need for the Chaos Emeralds suggests that the complexity of space-time is too much. Too much for him to regulate. Without them, Shadow has the knowledge, such as the internal model, but lacks the capacity to execute that knowledge effectively. Therefore, Shadow requiring the Chaos Emeralds provides an understanding for the law of requisite knowledge, which states that in order to adequately compensate perturbations, a control system must know which action to select from the variety of available actions. And this is where we get into chaos force as a cybernetic system. The chaos force itself can be understood as a dynamic, self-regulating system. It is a vast, unpredictable, and chaotic, mirroring many of the natural systems in cybernetics that are difficult to control without precise feedback mechanisms and sufficient complexity matching. So when we think of the emeralds, they're a feedback mechanism. So when Shadow taps into the Chaos Emeralds, he is essentially receiving feedback from the Chaos Force. The emeralds act as a medium, providing real-time information and energy, allowing Shadow to regulate space and time in a precise, controlled manner. Again, this is going to mirror the way a cybernetic system relies on constant feedback to adjust outputs relative to the environmental conditions. Now we're going to be looking at the concept of regulating chaos itself, because this is deeply rooted in cybernetic principles. In cybernetics, chaos is often viewed as a system with extreme complexity and unpredictable behavior. But with appropriate feedback loops and internal models, chaotic systems can be regulated to some degree. Again, we see Shadow's use of chaos control here, where he's empowered by the Chaos Emeralds, and the Chaos Force illustrates exactly how a chaotic system, again, space and time, can be temporarily regulated. Now, Chaos Emeralds as a bridge to the Chaos Force. Again, every message needs a medium. The Chaos Emeralds can be seen as those conduits that link Shadow to the deeper, chaotic environment of the Chaos Force. Again, in Ashby terms, the Emeralds enable Shadow to regulate a system far larger than himself. Without them, he cannot fully model or fully control the complexity of space time. But with them, his internal model is amplified, allowing him to match the complexity of the chaotic system and exert control over it. So it's a bigger chaos, such as the chaos force, over what we consider the physical realm's chaos. And that's why emeralds are a better regulator. The Chaos Emeralds enhance Shadow's ability to regulate space and time by extending his internal model to match the complexity of the system. The emeralds also increase feedback from the system, allowing Shadow to make more accurate and efficient regulatory challenges and changes. So, in a cybernetic analysis of the Chaos Emeralds from Sonic the Hedgehog, we're going to be we've explored the interaction of systems, feedback loops, and concepts of energy and information transfer within this narrative. The Chaos Emeralds as artifacts of immense power with abilities that we've seen for energy manipulation, reality warping, law manipulation, and these are analyzed as key nodes in a complex dynamic system that exhibits characteristics of both informational and operational closure. So the operational and informational closure, right? The Chaos Emeralds are viewed in the cybernetic system that operates within Sonic's universe, influencing both physical and metaphysical realities. So in this sense, the emeralds are central to the feedback loop where they respond to inputs, the emotional, the physical, and even the metaphysical states of the user, such as the tropos, and generate outputs. Again, this would be how much power they bestow, resurrection, manipulation of reality and space-time and space and time. The operational closure of the emeralds is demonstrated by their ability to autonomously regulate their energy and effects based on these inputs, such as the emotional state of the user. So the informational closure is seen in their interaction with cyberspace, where memories and data of individuals can alter the realm. Again, this suggests that the Chaos Emeralds as power sources function like a cybernetic interface, both receiving and generating information that shapes the reality of the digital dimension. The cyberspace realm can be analyzed as a separate subsystem where informational feedback loop between the physical world and the digital constructs takes place, showing how different states of reality are influenced by the informational content stored within the system. And this all runs us right into this idea of recursive feedback and adaptation. Again, the Chaos Emeralds exhibit a recursive feedback through their interaction with emotional states and the physical world. For instance, their ability to intensify based on emotions, positive or negative, mirrors a cybernetic system where emotional inputs, positive feedback, increase the system's capacity to amplify the user's power. And you can think of this as like going Hulk mad. This is a form of positive feedback loop where energy flows are regulated not just by external forces, but also by internal variables and the emotions and the intent of the user. The Chaos Emeralds possess the capacity for restoration and self repair. This indicates something of adaptability. These regenerative properties could be likened to a self regulating system where perturbations such as damage or depletion of energy are corrected through an internal restorative process. And this is a deep, deep understanding for the cybernetic theory of autopoiesis, where the system maintains its own integrity and identity despite those external influences. And then a key cybernetic principle that's underlying all of this is that energy and information are intrinsically linked. In the case of the Chaos Emeralds, their energy is both a source of power and a form of information. The manipulation of reality, time, and space by the emeralds can be analyzed as the transfer of information through energy. For example, the Chaos Emeralds alter physical laws or influence causality. They are essentially rearranging the informational structure of the universe. And this suggests that their power is a medium for information manipulation at a fundamental level. I'm talking quantum level. And so this concept is more reinforced by the relationship by the Chaos Emeralds and cyberspace, where energy from the emeralds enables memory uploads and transformations within the digital realm. By linking their energy to the storage and manipulation of personal and collective memories, the emeralds act as a cybernetic agent of control, shaping reality by converting energy into structured information that governs both the physical and metaphysical worlds. And all of this leads us to this multi layered system of interaction. We have the Chaos Emeralds operating within a multi layered system that includes different ontological levels. We have the physical, the metaphysical, and even the informational. Their ability to affect everything from local phenomenon, again, like plant life and then weather, to multiversal entities, Solaris, the end, demonstrate their influence across distinct layers of reality. And again, this is the cybernetic concept of hierarchical systems, where lower level operations, such as healing or flight, are going to feed into those higher order functions, reality manipulation, and law control. Each emerald has unique properties. We have time manipulation, fire transformation, underwater breathing, etc. All of these contribute to the overall system's complexity, showing how the combined interaction of these different nodes can result in emergent properties. Again, this is the super form, supersonic, hyperknuckles, multi-dimensional influence. And this reflects how individual components in a cybernetic system contribute to the higher order functionality of the whole system. Regulatory systems and their limitations is something that's very important also when we start talking about what's going on. Because despite their immense power, the Chaos Emeralds have regulatory checks, such as the Master Emerald's ability to nullify their power or the reliance on the emotional states to fully tap into their potential. So, this tells us that the system in which the Chaos Emeralds function has built in constraints, and this is to prevent unchecked feedback. And you can think of this as like the regulation of feedback loops in a cybernetic system as a way to maintain its stability. The draining of negative energy also indicates a need for balance within the system. And again, this is homeostasis or energy equilibrium in cybernetic systems. And all of this jumps into the cool part of the transformation that I was talking earlier about the super forms. Through the emerald's energy that can be likened to this phase transition within a cybernetic system, we have the user's state shifts from a normal operational mode to a height of state and power. This is not a permanent state, but it is contingent on the user's emotions and the collective energy of the inner emeralds. The invulnerability and the vast powers that come with the superform represents temporary amplification of the system's output, demonstrating how feedback from the environment, again, this emotional and situational inputs, can push a system into a higher state of function. In cybernetic terms, regulating a chaotic system often involves balancing between a state of order and disorder. And because of that, we have to look at the state of Shadow and Sonic. Shadow, through chaos control, manages his balance. He doesn't eliminate chaos, rather, he uses chaos emeralds to create a temporary pocket of order within the chaotic system. By stopping time, warping space, and teleporting, Shadow temporarily imposes structure on the universe, but this order is fleeting, and the natural chaotic tendencies of space time will eventually return to their state of originality once that chaos control ends. And again, we have the dynamic regulation, such as the cybernetic systems that create these temporary equilibriums in these unstable environments by regulating them through these feedback mechanisms. Shadow's regulation isn't permanent, but it's a dynamic response to the environmental feedback. And him exerting influence real time is the cybernetic agent adjusting actions based on those constant continuous inputs. And so when we think about cybernetics, energy, and information that are often closely related, the Chaos Emeralds function as both. They are sources that empower Shadow's regulation, and they are also information conduits connecting him to the larger system of the Chaos Force. And by tapping into these emeralds, Shadow gains both power and knowledge to execute his chaos control. And that's how we can say that the chaos force is a non-linear complex system. The chaos force is where we have small inputs that create large, unpredictable outputs. And this is a feature of any chaotic system, right? This is the butterfly effect. But Shadow tapping into the Chaos Force using the emeralds, he is interfacing with this non-linearity, especially through his emotions, and he's using Chaos Control to achieve outcomes that would be otherwise impossible. And nonlinear feedback systems, any nonlinear systems, are inherently unpredictable. However, we know that through their cybernetic regulation, these systems can be harnessed to produce predictable outputs within controlled parameters. And this is exactly Shadow's power when he's using chaos control. He's understanding the feedback loops within the space time in his own internal model, and he's nailing it down. And the Chaos Emeralds amplify his control over this complex, nonlinear environment. And that just shows that Shadow's ability to perform chaos control through the Chaos Emeralds is a fascinating application of the cybernetic principles of the good regulator theorem. And while he does possess this internal model on his own, and we have the Chaos Emeralds serving as the energy amplifier and the information conduit, we also have to understand that he is in himself trying to match the complexity of the chaos system that he is controlling. And it's not just a metaphor, although we could say it that way. Him adjusting his internal model to regulate this chaotic environment is the core principle of cybernetics. When he says he is the ultimate being, it's because he's the ultimate cybernetic being. He has feedback and regulation of these complex systems. Now, let's talk about Sonic and Shadow in combat. In a battle between Sonic and Shadow, we have their contrasting strengths. We have Sonic's speed and versatility versus Shadow's mastery of the Chaos Force and his cybernetic reality of these dynamic interactions. And we can look at their battle, right? So we've got speed versus power. Sonic relies on his unparalleled speed to outmaneuver his opponents, making to hit him really difficult. However, we have Shadow accessing the Chaos Force. He can disrupt Sonic's rhythm and catch him off guard, as we often see in the comics as well as in some of the games. And their battles are this like super powerful cybernetic interactions where we have speed and agility versus cybernetics, and Shadow's ability to adapt in his own cybernetic truth as a use of chaos control against Shadow, because he ends up becoming able to do that. So it's like a mind-blowing reality shift here when we think about this. Just because we have Shadow's proficiency in the Chaos Force and how that gives him a unique tactical advantage, we also have to understand that Sonic's fast-paced offense, as it faces off against Shadow's chaos enhanced techniques, their complex narrative of cybernetic regulation battle, where each character is just going to be constantly adapting to one another's actions. And again, this is why we see them coming back and forth and battling, although ultimately we do see that Sonic is the champion here. And that's because we have to put their strengths in scale based on the Chaos Force. Sonic's abilities scale linearly with the Chaos Emeralds. Shadow has an exponential power boost, but the problem that ends up happening is Shadow's powers comes at a cost of control and endurance, whereas Sonic's abilities maintain his super form for a lot longer periods, and this reflects his superior ability. Sonic is an efficient regulator. His relationship with the Chaos Emeralds is more linear, it's more stable. He's able to sustain his super form, and this demonstrates his efficiency as a regulator. He's able to maintain control over the chaotic energy for these extended periods. And yeah, we've got Shadow. He's a high capacity regulator. He acts as a larger conduit for this chaotic energy, experiencing rapid amplification but struggling to sustain it. His bursts of extreme power reflect his high capacity for regulation, but his endurance limits him for prolonged confrontations. So, what do we have here? We have Sonic as a smaller battery with a lot more efficiency because he's able to have that moderate amount of charge, and he uses that energy efficiently over a much longer time. And his steadiness during his fights, such as like the one against the final Howard Hazard, shows this is to be the case, that he's a much more reliable combatant. But again, we've got Shadow. He's a larger battery that can absorb much more energy at a faster rate, and this allows him to power up significantly in short bursts. But again, larger capacity, higher output drain. we have less energy over the long haul. He's built to run hot and fast, but he can't maintain that high energy output for as long, and this usually leads to a lot quicker depletion of his powers. And this also explains why he has this burst of extreme power, especially in chaos control. But he's also always struggling to sustain his super form over time. So if we actually look at it from input output, Shadow has a wider channel for both receiving and expending energy. But Sonic, his channel is more conservative, resulting in a more controlled but slightly less explosive use of the Chaos Force. So to kind of like wrap this into a neat little bucket of how we're looking at the two between chaos and control, Shadow's ability to perform chaos control shows a sophisticated application of cybernetic principles. He is the ultimate cybernetic being as a regulator. His internal model of space-time, combined with the power of the Chaos Emeralds, allows him to regulate the complexity and with precision and control. And through these feedback loops, complexity matching, and adaptation, Shadow exemplifies the core tenets of cybernetics. Sonic, on the other hand, represents a more adaptive and efficient system, relying on speed and versatility to maintain control over his environment. Together, Sonic and Shadow's contrasting approaches to regulation and power create a fascinating cybernetic dynamic where speed, chaos, control, and feedback converge in their battles with one another, and Sonic wins.